would like to start today's session with a moment of reflection and acknowledgement. Our organization acknowledges that our work happens on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples, who've stewarded these lands since time immemorial, and our work extends far beyond the local area, as well as your own across the province and the traditional territories of Indigenous people across this place now known as British Columbia, and both as an uninvited guest and resident of lands of the unceded territories of the SSMUH First Nation, and as a professional engaged with land use practices. I'm very grateful and humbled to be here today and to acknowledge my responsibility in participating in reconciliation as an individual and as a professional. So moving into today's agenda, we have heard from planners across the province, both at our own summit and further on, that they really want to hear about what's going on in other communities and be able to bounce ideas off of each other. So there's a bit of a combined format today, and we have both a guest speaker who we'll be introducing momentarily, and then we have, after opportunity to hear what's happening in the town of Oliver and ask some questions of the speaker, more of an open forum so that people can raise any topic of interest related to housing and what's happening, questions that they might have in their own communities, and really want to give that opportunity to chat amongst each other. We are trying out a single room breakout session, not splitting people up, so we'll have lots of opportunities to both kind of verbally and in the chat check in and share with each other what ideas are happening. We'll be starting off with a poll before the presentation and then going into that. But very briefly introducing Small Housing's work. For those of you who don't know us yet, Small Housing is a nonprofit that's been around for over a decade. If you could advance to the next slide, please. We champion the evolution of single detached neighborhoods to provide ground-oriented homes that are equitable for all, and we are a hub for good practices, new ideas, and network building in support of gentle density housing in BC. We do advocacy, research, capacity building, technical advising, which I'll get into a bit more at the end in terms of our current offerings, and market development as well to drive innovation in the small housing space. And next slide. And what you're part of today, we've run a series of events and services that are under the umbrella of the Gentle Density Network, which is a network of planners and related professionals brought together to learn and share experiences to enable a greater uptake of gentle density, where you have an opportunity to learn and explore and share your insights amongst each other. And we also take what we hear from the Gentle Density Network and look to advocate for additional supports and resources that may be able to support you in your work, and to support you in your local efforts by creating the network of practitioners that you can rely on to also advance this work. So before I introduce our presenter for today, if we go to the next slide, we've got a panel, and asking those who are here today, is your community, while you're implementing the small scale multi-unit housing zoning requirements, are you also looking to take this as an opportunity to make streamlining or simplification changes to your zoning? It's a topic that we'll be exploring a bit in the presentation, and wanted to see whether that's something that's on your radar as well. So we'll give a few moments to get some responses in here. Got about 35, and I know that there's a few that have told us that there's a room full of people under a single login here, so maybe take a collective pulse for those of you who are in a multi-participant login here. And while we're waiting, I should introduce myself. I'm Carl Isaac, the Director of Planning with Small Housing BC. I'm joined by my colleagues, Tamara White, who's our Executive Director, as well as David Sisk, our Communications Specialist, Aina Adashinsky, Program Manager, and Vienna Brox, who's a Project Coordinator from the Small Housing Office today. We have results ready to share there, Aina. You can populate those. So I think vast majority are either definitely making opportunities or making changes to simplify, and or undecided, still looking at options, but see one or so maybe only making the changes strictly for small scale right now. So to move to introduce our presenter today, Randy Houle is a registered professional planner with a master's degree from the University of Waterloo. He's been with the town of Oliver for past 5 years as Director of Development Services, but also grew up in the town of Oliver and is passionate about helping to solve the housing crisis in the town that he grew up in. Prior to being with Oliver, he's a planner with the city of Penticton, and in his role currently, he's also appointed as a subdivision improving officer, as well as many other hats that come with being employed in a small town. So I'll turn things over now to Randy to walk us through what's happening in Oliver on this front.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for the intense music intro. I didn't have my own intro, which is unfortunate, but that was I had turned my speakers really loud and that was pretty shocking. All right, so I just need to share my screen here. So let's talk a little bit. Can you see it there, Carl? Good?
I can see you're great.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about small scale multi-unit housing in terms of simplifying your zoning, the town of Oliver and the approach we took. So mainly we decided to combine all single family zones into one zone for simplicity, allowing up to 4 units per parcel in any configuration. So you could have, 2 single family homes with suites, 4 single family homes, whatever the case may be. We got rid of carriage houses and just call them dwellings now. So we're not limiting accessory dwellings, just going with 4 dwellings of any kind, basically, and just letting lot coverage and setbacks and building heights basically determine the how buildings are built. We reduced parking spaces to 1.5 spaces per unit. This is something that I discussed with council. I went to council and said we should do 1. They actually said maybe we should do 2, and I said, well, we probably shouldn't go the opposite way, so let's do 1.5, and they've agreed to that. So we removed visitor parking spaces for small scale multi-unit housing. So there'll still be visitor parking space required for larger developments, but not anything that for 4 units and under. And then also we decided to apply the small scale multi-unit housing provisions to properties over 4,050 square meters, which is basically an acre. There was only a handful of residentially zoned properties in the town that had services. There was only a few that were bigger than that 1 acre, so we decided to include them as well. I know that different municipalities, mainly larger ones that I've been speaking with other planners in the area, took an approach where they split the zones, but mainly because of lot sizes. Oliver's so small. I would be happy to hear from everyone else too at the end of this presentation, the discussion, what they're doing about lot sizes. That was one that I've gone back and forth. And when I say lot size, minimum lot size for subdivision. That was something I toyed with a lot and just trying to understand. I had conversations with other planners, developers, and excuse me, really it's going to be, at least the approach I'm taking, is let the market decide. Yeah, someone could take a 900 square meter lot or 1,000 square meter, potentially divide that into 3, but are you going to be able to put 4 units on each of those lots? Like, the market's really going to decide things here. So that's sort of the approach I'm taking. So you'll see, I'll talk about what I've decided to do for the minimum lot size for subdivision. This was important. So as you all know, you need to look at your urban containment boundary. This is in our OCP, a map. So I followed, so the yellow boundary is our town boundary, and then the blue is our urban containment boundary. It mainly follows the border of the town where the agricultural land reserve is. So these are all agricultural properties that are outside of the urban containment boundary. One thing that was particularly interesting is there's 4 parcels sort of in our southwest boundary here. These parcels were actually removed from the ALR in the late 90s. The ALR mapping still has them as ALR. And so then when we drew the urban containment boundary in 2017, we drew that based on what the ALR says. So I would recommend to everyone to look carefully at your urban containment boundary. These are fairly decent sized properties still within town limits that are serviced. So we decided to include the small scale multi-unit housing provisions for these lots. This is a lot. There's a lot of red. So basically we took our current R1 zone, spread that across the entire town in the lower density residential zones. We kept the manufactured home park zone separate. So there's 2 residential zones, being RS1 and then manufactured homes. But we basically just allowed duplex, townhouse, apartment building, we call it apartment building if there's not individual access to the outside. So really it says apartment building, but it's apartment building to a max of 4 units. So you'll see here, this is what I was getting at with the minimum parcel size. I put it to what our current smallest single family zone was, which is 350 minimum. Parcel width, same thing. I matched the smallest single family zone that we have. And then a provision up here, when it's not connected to the water and sewer system, then it can only be 2 units, being a house and a suite. And when it is connected, depending on if it's under 280 or over 280, that determines the number of units that are allowed. And there's only one parcel within the town of Oliver that was under 280, which is interesting enough. So if you're just getting started with small scale multi-unit housing, really the first exercise is to do a GIS exercise and try to just understand the size of your lots. That was helpful for us. And then with the front parcel line, so by taking away carriage houses, I was still concerned that I was concerned that going with a 6-meter setback, which is what we have for houses, and we allowed 3 meters for carriage houses, we have quite a few 2-story carriage houses that then would become non-conforming. So what I did is I said, for the first and second story, then it's a 3-meter setback. And then if it's a 3-story building, then the third story would be set back 6 meters. So that's the approach I took there to help address what I thought was causing the issue with getting rid of carriage houses. And then interior setbacks, exterior setbacks, trying to reduce those. Another thing I thought about for a bit was bare land strata housing. I decided to get rid of that zone and combine it with this zone. And then I just put a provision in there that says that the setbacks apply to the parent parcel only, which is what is pretty common in other bare land strata zones. So the setbacks really just from the outside parcel. What they do within the parcel with like on individual bare land strata lots, that's the building code will figure that out. And this provision D here has always been in our bylaw since I came from Penticton. What it allows people to do, it basically says in the case of a pre-existing building being converted, the setbacks are the existing setbacks. Any alterations or additions shall comply with the setbacks. So if someone has an older garage or shed that's still in good shape that could be possibly converted to a dwelling unit, then the setback's just the existing setback. So they don't, the building, if it's always been there, you're not requiring them to get a variance. They can just convert it as per the building code. Height, I went to 11 meters to match the provincial recommendations. And then this is the last part of the zone. Parcel coverage was increased. Floor area decreased just to allow for smaller units to be created. And we had this provision about building width that I think was in there. Maybe at some time Oliver allowed single wide mobile homes to be built in these areas. So they wanted a minimum width. So I just got rid of that and put not applicable. So this is a comparison how Oliver's zoning is compared to what the province is recommending. So the front setback, 3 meters, but 6 meters for if there's a garage. That's always been in our bylaw. If someone parks, well, as we know, people that build garages generally fill it with stuff and park in front of it. And this was a carryover, just making sure that there's room in front of the garage. And so they're not hanging out into the sidewalk if they park in front of the garage. Rear setback, we talked about, interior setback, height, stories, parcel coverage, and then parking. We kept 2 spaces for a single family dwelling or duplex unit, just knowing that those units are generally larger and can accommodate 2 spaces. And then 1.5 spaces for an apartment or townhouse unit. And that's 1.5 rounds up, but it rounds up after you calculate it for all 4. So 1.5 times 4 would be 6. So then 6 spaces are required for a 4-unit townhouse or apartment unit. We did do some OCP related amendments. I should say we are going to do some OCP amendments. We had in Oliver, there was a max for units per hectare and then also floor area. And so I've recommended to council to remove that unit per hectare maximum in the medium and high density zones. If we don't do that, then there'll actually be some parcels that are currently zoned for single family that could build 4 units. And that would be actually more than some of these medium and high density properties that exist now. So just making sure we keep pace with the lower density properties. And then for the meantime, we've basically blanketed the whole residential area with a DP area, which is not recommended by the province, but it's something that I know that our council will still want a bit of control of the form and character. So we added it to the multifamily area, but then we're exempting single family dwellings and secondary suites from that. requiring a development permit. In terms of implementation, my council really likes to go, whenever I've done housekeeping and amendments, to talk to them ahead of time. So that's what I've done. So on January 29th, I brought all these provisions forward. Very good discussion. Parking was one thing that they didn't agree with. So I came back a couple days ago, and they were supportive of everything. A couple little things here and there, non small scale multi-unit housing related amendments, such as panhandle widths was one thing that I talked to them about, and a couple other things that they have concerns about. One of the other changes was removing commercial parking in the downtown, trying to make a push for that, and they had a bit of concerns there. So just a few things that basically prevented them from being read a first and second time. So what I recommended now is, I was a bit ahead of the game with all of the changes. Let's take a step back, and I can continue to learn from everyone else in the area, and you guys as well, what you're doing. And then we're going to host an open house on March 13th in Oliver, just to give everyone sort of an understanding about Bill 44 and what all of those changes are and what they mean for Oliver. And then we'll come back to council again on April 2nd, talk about the feedback we received at the open house, and then likely they'll want to know what I've come back with some of these other things that I talked about, other zoning amendments. And then we'll go through the readings of the bylaws and the public hearing. Our council meetings are 3 weeks apart now, so it'll take a bit of time, but I feel we'll be able to get there before the end of June. And the one other important part is that we will have to hold a public hearing, because there are a few other amendments in there that aren't related to small scale multi-unit housing. This is another one I'd be happy to hear from everyone else. Like, would you actually split the zoning amendment bylaws and do one zoning amendment bylaw for small scale multi-unit housing and then the rest for related changes? I figured we just do one. Most people don't show up to the public hearings anyway. And we'll also have to have another public hearing for the OCP that's going to be done. And then lastly, I'll just talk about the process, not just small scale multi-unit housing, but just the rest of the associated things for Bill 44. So we already are working now on a housing needs assessment. So that's started. We're working on an infrastructure capacity review just to better understand if there are any neighborhoods that really are underserviced or going to have issues. And then also, we were in the process anyway of understanding what our water supply is, and if we need to drill a new well, and or when we need to expand our wastewater treatment plant. So it'll be helpful now that we can do a wider study of the neighborhoods and better understand infrastructure capacity within the town of Oliver. And then we will start the OCP amendment, the larger one that's required after June and July. I believe the province is going to provide some direction on that in June or July, but I also know that they were supposed to provide some direction on the housing needs reports in January, and I don't think that's been done yet. So we'll see when it happens, but with the goal of those being done by the end of 2025. And then in 2025, we'll look at the amenity cost charge, if that's worth it for Oliver, revising our development cost charges, and then also revising our subdivision bylaw. So with that, I could take any questions, and I'm happy to be here and learn from everyone else. Thank you.
So I see that there's a couple of questions already in the chat, and maybe we'll start with some of those. And then if folks want to raise their hand for questions, that would be great. And I'll keep track of that in the participant list. From Corey and Sydney, there is both a comment and a question echoing the concern or the struggling with the lot size question. So maybe we could chat a bit further on that if Corey has specific things he wants to elaborate on there. But another one was around the interior side setbacks of 1.2 meters, whether that's been a concern at the 3-story level, and whether you've looked at anything in there.
Yeah, no, I think the first part about lot size was more of a comment, but yeah, we can discuss that with the others as well. And then with the interior setback, I mean, in our 2 smaller single family zones now, you can already do 3 stories with a 1.2 setback. So that really didn't come up. 1.2, 1.5, it is what it is. So we went with the provincial recommendation for that one.
And in your current zones that are larger lots, the 1.2 what would the equivalent be for one of your larger lots? Do you have any 2 or 3 meter side setbacks where it would be a significant change?
No, there was 1.5 and then now that'll go to 1.2. So that's why I was saying 1.5, 1.2 is not, I don't feel is a major change.
Great. Next question we have in the chat about the housing needs report. And the question is, what type of actions are you taking while we're waiting for the standard methodology from the province to prepare for that?
Yeah, so we've already engaged a consultant and they're doing all the data work and they fully understand that they've put in their proposal to us that, you know, the price is the price regardless of what the province says and if that changes things. So it's all the upfront work now and we really don't think there'll be much different requirements when the province comes out with their recommendations.
Moving over to infrastructure needs from Aaron, how do you predict the increase in number of units in already developed areas in terms of modeling for growth and likelihood? Have you been looking at the policy manuals suggested approach in terms of development likelihood, or any thoughts around modeling?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to follow up with our engineers. I think they're going to model it as based on 4 units can be built on every single family lot, which we all know is going to be, at least in Oliver, is going to be unlikely. It's going to take a long time for build out to occur. So it's going to be really incremental for sure. But yeah, I mean, I would have to follow up to see what our engineers are doing in terms of best practices for this infrastructure study. We only started it a few weeks ago, so I'm not sure.
And we've got another setback question. So for the 3 meter setbacks at the third story, is that just at the front lot line?
No, the 3 meter setback for the third story, that was a rear setback requirement. So likely no, I mean, most people aren't going to build it was just like the way I worded it is just for the third story, but people likely won't just build a 2-story building at 3 and then step it back. They'll just build the whole thing at 6 meters. That's sort of what we're going for there.
And would that be, do you have lots with lane access typically in Oliver? So then it would be
Probably half
space for
of them have
yeah.
lane access.
So we've got development permit question. So are you requiring multifamily development permit for an existing house that builds 3 new secondary suites? And so I guess that would be 3 new dwellings because it wouldn't be a suite specifically, but how do you deal with the existing homes that are being renovated to fit out a new suite on the
Yeah.
interior?
Yeah, well, the exemption in our OCP that I've put in there is just for single family dwellings and suites. So I guess in that scenario they could be exempt. But this is one thing that is interesting is the BC Building Code, from my understanding, only allows 1 suite. So I don't know why they're saying you could have, even in the guide it says there could be multiple secondary suites, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, may have been referring to a duplex, a side-by-side duplex with suites below. But yeah, in a single building, you can only have 1 secondary suite.
Yeah,
So it
I
would
mean,
just
if
be
it
a
was
full
if
development.
it was a duplex with suites, then yeah, they would need the development permit, I guess, for when they build the duplex. So if it's an existing one, then that's putting suites in an existing duplex, yeah, I guess they wouldn't need a development permit.
Got a couple questions more for you, and then I think we'll
Sure.
probably open up to kind of full discussion for everyone to have a bit of a free-for-all to share what's happening in their own communities as well. On the lot coverage question, there's a question about, did you look at having a lower lot coverage than the provincial requirements? Not specified what reason that would be for, but in terms of massing or maybe drainage on site.
Yeah, this was for sure something I thought about. We just, I mean, I looked at it and thought 45, 50. I mean, the province is saying 50. I really took an approach trying to just be consistent with what the province recommended, and I've been discussing it with other planners, and this is kind of where I was getting into the whole, should I split it, right? Because maybe there are some areas of town where 50 makes more sense, right? So yeah, it's still this thing that I'm sort of trying to figure out. Is it just a one size fits all approach for zoning, or is it worth kind of identifying certain areas of town closer to the downtown and maybe allowing 50% on those, and smaller lot size, minimum lot sizes, and then in our traditional larger single family neighborhoods going the opposite way. So yeah, it's ever evolving for sure. It's like like our development services clerk would say one day I was like, oh, carriage houses are a good idea. No, let's get rid of carriage houses. And the next day carriage houses, and then oh no. And I have different versions of the bylaw saved, and yeah, it's been interesting for sure. Being the only planner in Oliver.
Yeah, wear many hats. Well, that's great to carry on. I think there's another question in here, and maybe we can finish with that from Tamara. Can you speak to the reasoning in limiting the form of additional units in areas not serviced by utilities? So the question of either a secondary suite internal to the building versus allowing a separate accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, it's because most of those properties are under a hectare in Oliver. Most of those rural ones that aren't serviced actually, and you can't. I don't know if we get funding from the Okanagan Basin Water Board. It's that 1 hectare rule. That's what most planners would know. So it's to do with groundwater contamination and septic. So it can only be within the building. You can't have a separate detached second dwelling if you're not connected to sewer. Yeah, sorry.
You need to have a backup space for a septic field in case the
Yeah,
one fails.
exactly. So that's why. Yeah, that's why we had said it has to be within the building, just not so we don't confuse people.
Got it. And in addition to these sessions, just wanted to share with any communities that are still looking for support in developing their zoning bylaw. We are looking to provide group supports along with partners, Urban Systems and Lidstone, for a bylaw bootcamp program with including a guidebook and toolkit that allows for sample bylaw language and all of the questions and considerations that you might need to be working through as you're looking to tailor your zoning amendment to fit your community, as well as some communication templates for council and for public information there. So if anyone is interested in that, please do reach out to us. There's an email address on there, info@smallhousingbc.org. If you go to the next slide, there's just a few pre-scheduled. We've got Miri, who's on the call with us today from the city of Castlegar, who will be sharing about their approach to small-scale multi-unit housing. And then additional ones will be announced in the next short while in terms of other topics and speakers that will be coming forward. We do have a Gentle Density Network survey that'll be coming out, so check your inbox. March 1st is when we're anticipating to send that out so that we can continue to provide services that are relevant for you all.